Hey folks, Steve here with a very special video for you today. We are going to be beginning my coverage of the game Highway to the Kremlin 2, Napoleon's March on Moscow, June 24th through December 13th, 1812. Now, this is going to look like it is from the Library of Napoleonic Battles, but it's not. In case you're unfamiliar with this, while it is from the Operational Studies Group, and is designed by Kevin Zucker. This is actually from the Campaigns of Napoleon series, and this is the only 5x entry, which means it's five times the scale of, I guess, the baseline in the Campaigns of Napoleon series. And this very specifically is the sort of second rendition of this game, hence the two. Um, but this is ultimately a very a different game series than Library of Napoleonic Battles, and it is really, I mean, even if you were to say that the Library of Napoleonic Battles is not a tactical game, I feel odd not calling it a tactical game to some degree, but I get it if it's grand tactical or even starting, burgeoning on operational. The Campaigns of Napoleon series is explicitly, no ifs, ands, or buts about it, very operational in my mind. Even if you were to try to call it strategic level, I'm not sure that it is. I think this is very much in the line of operational. And so this series, perhaps, also known as, better known as, also known as the Napoleon at Bay series, because the originating game for this was Napoleon at Bay, which has gone through a couple different versions, and the most recent would be the sort of update kit expansion that you can still get from NapoleonGames.com, the OSG website, the storefront for that, which is not an independent game. If you were to buy that expansion kit, it's listed as an expansion kit because it is intended to update an existing copy of Napoleon at Bay, a game that has not been republished for quite some time, several years, in fact. And just a point to say, because I think it's worthwhile to mention here, like if you go to the OSG website today and you look at all the recent games from Kevin Zucker, there is a very hard focus on the Library of Napoleonic Battles. And this series I need to dig into more than I already have. But that's the one folks are probably going to be most familiar with today because those games are in print. The new releases from OSG are in that series, and they get the most attention, in the most recent years. Highway to the Kremlin 2 is the only game in the Campaigns of Napoleon series that you can still buy from the publisher right now. So you can, I believe, as of this video, which is April 2025, I believe you can still go buy Highway to the Kremlin and you will get a copy and all will be well. But if you were interested in any of the other games in the series, Habit of Victory, the Bonaparte in Italy one, Napoleon at the Crossroads, you have to go to the secondary market. And while they are out there, they may trend higher price over time. So it's kind of a weird one, and I think because of all of this, because the system is not getting as much attention as Library of Napoleonic Battles, there's not as much coverage for this game, or even really the rest of the Campaigns of Napoleon series. So I'm going to try to do my best to cover this game, and I may cover other games in the series. Not all of them, mind you, because some are just old enough that I'm going to have a hard time chasing them down, and I may not want to spend the money. But I do have a few of those other Campaigns of Napoleon games, which we may see get to the table. But first up is going to be this one. I think this one will be most useful to folks because, again, you can go get this today, I believe, while it's still in stock. It is unclear if we're ever going to see reprints of the other Campaigns of Napoleon games. So this is a good one to start with because this means you can go play this one if you like what you see and you want to give it a shot. It is out there. Now, I will say, Library of Napoleonic Battles has been given a much more, I'll say, cohesive modern treatment in terms of the rules. So if you were to go buy, Napoleon's Counter-Strike or Napoleon's End or one of the recent games, you're going to get a nice 7.35, 36, or 38 rulebook for Library of Napoleonic Battles. It's going to have pictures. It's very nice looking, nice set of rules, well conveyed, and all that goodness. And then there's the study folder for the game that you're playing, with usually not a huge amount of additional sort of game specific rules, very light in that regard. Um, Campaigns of Napoleon does not have that treatment. This is all a little bit rougher. The rule books do not have much in the way of pictures or color. And just to show you guys what I mean by that, you have standard rules here. And the standard rules are for Campaigns of Napoleon, by the way, adjusted for 5x. And you see it's 2-column format. There's like some pictures, mostly for the counters, but everything else is 2-column format, black and white, and you're really, barring what's on the back here, showing the supply, there's just a lot of text. A lot of text of the rules, and while they are organized in a fairly coherent way, it's just not quite the same level of polish as you might get in current era Library of Napoleonic Battles. And then the trick is, here's the standard rules. I'm not sure there was ever going to be another 5x entry in this series, but there is in fact then a game exclusive rules which modify the existing standard rules and then contain the scenario information, your playbook, so to speak. So unfortunately, you do kind of have to bounce between the rule books, which is funny because honestly, who knows what would have come at some point. You could say that we could have seen another 5x game. Maybe we still will see another 5x game someday. But it might have been easier just to have the one rule book and just everything all together here. But that's kind of the rub with this. So a little bit trickier in that regard for the rules. There are plenty of player aid sheets and all manner of things that will make this still a very much an OSG experience. Now, I have gone through and punched and sorted and rounded my counters, all very nice looking, all fitting in one GMT counter tray, very, very easy, nice and peasy. And I'm going to show it here just so you can see in the background. The map is great. Now, a word of warning, I'm not sure what happens if you buy the game today, if they do this for you. When I bought my copy, not that long ago, last couple of years maybe is when I first picked it up. The maps, which are gorgeous, do have some overlapping issues, and I personally took a pair of scissors and clipped off a, I don't know, 1/4 inch of the one map so that they could lay on top of each other and actually overlap properly. And you can kind of, you can see the line here just because it's not sitting fully flat even underneath my plexi. The cut line and the overlap all the way down through here. But it looks fine and dandy at this point, so I don't mind. I didn't mind having to make that cut. I suspect you should be good if you were to get this game, now, that might be cut for you. But don't quote me on that because I just don't know how they're shipping this thing anymore. But in true OSG fashion, the map is a work of art, and I'm not exactly sure who did the map here. This is a Joe Eust map with a 2020 revision by Charles Keebler. So beautiful as you would expect, and this is really, you almost can't tell what you're looking at here, guys, because it's just so much terrain. But this is indeed Russia, and it stretches, in glare land over here. The Grand Duchy of Warsaw, just on the very edge of the map, you have Wengau, Lublin, just off the edge of the camera view. There's Prussia up here, Tilsit up there, and then it stretches. You want to figure out what all you cover. Well, there is Riga up there, And if you're going to follow the highway to the Kremlin for the game, you can kind of follow this line out here where you're going to reach out to here's Minsk, and then out here is Smolensk, and then way out in the deep reaches, Moscow. And a whole lot of terrain in between, and a lot of roads and a lot of craziness. And what will be really interesting is ultimately, it doesn't seem like this game or even the system is particularly counter heavy or counter dense on the map. There's plenty of counters, don't get me wrong, but a lot of the time you're going to be putting units off on the leader display charts over here, where a leader is going to have units that are kind of in their stack, and we're going to hold them off map in these organizational displays. And then what is really on the map then is just the primary leader of the stack. So like the actual counters we're going to be moving around, not that many, at least on the map, and there'll be always a spread because we're going to have different units in different places out there. But by no means is this an East Front World War II game where you'd see a solid line or semi-solid line all the way down the edge of the map like an OCS game. This is actually going to be a pretty open map, all things considered. That may change over the course of the game, but really the here's Napoleon's army trying to work its way up to Moscow and all the sort of maneuvers associated to it. Now the map is quite nice. There are some tables. So in the bottom left, there's a combat results table, which is going to differentiate based on terrain and then odds and a few other things to determine who's taking losses or retreating. And boy, this combat system is, I'll say it's interesting. And then on the lower right here, we have terrain key, another combat results table. So probably going to be looking over here the most. Weather track. And then you see there's some administrative points. This is governing activations of forces. You're going to have replacement points. So both sides have that. A phase tracker, turn tracker, basically. And then we have the Paris morale track, which is really going to govern ultimately victory. So if Paris morale drops too low, we're going to lose as the French. If it gets very high, we could see the French automatically win. If French morale or the Paris morale track is high up here and we take Moscow, there is a possibility via die roll that Napoleon can get a negotiated peace, but that die roll is going to be fickle. And so that Paris morale track is going to be adjusted based on the capturing of major cities. But there's the possibility that the cities will be put to the torch and will not be as valuable as you think they will be for victory point purposes. Winning major battles will also give some morale or lose morale. So there's going to be a really tough thing here, right? The balance, like how could have Napoleon have won this campaign? Well, it would be bringing Russia to the table, but boy, that's going to be a hard thing to achieve. And even looking at the historical values of these things at the different starting points of the campaign game that you can play in the box, it was never really that good, and attrition will actually play a huge role in our strength numbers dwindling and dwindling and dwindling, I suspect. I mean, overall, the components, like I said, are very much in line with OSG. I appreciate the map. This is all on point. I think the real trick here is, guys, that the rules are awfully different from Library of Napoleonic Battles, and that's a fine thing. I would not expect them to be the same. I mean, just we're fitting a huge amount of Russia on the board here at a fairly zoomed out level compared to what we're used to seeing in Library of Napoleonic Battles. This being much more operational. This being still very much about maneuver and the effectiveness of our supply train and all that goodness. So that's the brief look here, guys, as part of the intro. I should probably cover a few other bits here. One thing I do want to do is get a few markers out on the map to show the quote unquote highway to the Kremlin that is actually mentioned on the supply example diagram, because supply is going to be really important, like almost OCS like in terms of tracing from your depots to forces, and then also to what's referred to as a center of operations, which you could look at as sort of an HQ, basically saying like this is where our main kind of supply endpoint is, and our troops are kind of operating out of that. Our main forces, our main armies, are operating out and from that center of operations. But we can kind of trace the path that we need to take to get to Moscow, right? If highway to the Kremlin, we are trying to get to Moscow. What are the critical supply depot locations that we're going to want? I would like to get some markers on the map and think through what that means for us, because I will be playing the solitaire, but ultimately it's going to be from, it'll feel very much from the French perspective, because it is the French that need to make something happen here. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so this is a different camera angle, guys. I'm going to try to do my best to speak loudly to make sure the microphone picks me up. I know I've had some audio issues lately. We're looking at the west side of the map right now. And what you see is the beginning of the French supply tracing out to Moscow would begin right over here. This is hex 0120. And then it counts out to what is basically, let's see, the tracing is either going to be, now let's see, active supply source out to a depot. At least so many hexes. Out to Kovno. Then to Vilna, Vilnius. Then to Molodechno. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Probably not. Borisov. Right, and that's almost, in terms of hexes, that's maybe like a little less than halfway to the Kremlin. And then if we adjust our view over here to the east side, we would then be going to Orsha, and a quick hop over to Smolensk itself. That'll be a critical point in the campaign, probably. Then to Drogobush. Probably not pronouncing that correctly. Sorry. And then Gatsk. And then we have Mozhask. That's probably not how you pronounce that. Finally, Moscow. I think I could say that somewhat right. Moscow. So that's pretty deep. That's a pretty deep run, guys. All things considered. And you figure there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hexes, maybe in between each leg of the journey. That is bigger and smaller depending on where you're looking. And honestly, that's not very far of a jump you might look at. But think about, just to take us out a second, ignore the camera leg. Imagine for a second you are working all this out and you lose a link in the chain. Uh-oh. What happens? Well, surely nothing good. And that's really going to be the challenge that I think, as the French, we're going to be grappling with, of not just are we advancing, are we protecting our supply lines, are we looking for enemy movement, all that good fun stuff. Now, there is an interesting bit of rules here where we could, if we get out and take Riga, use Riga as a supply source and have an alternative or maybe even backup line of supply that we could shift our weight to. And that might enable us to, hold a different line of supply. So you could imagine from here to here to here to here and so on, and have an alternate route. I don't know if it'll be valuable to venture at that, but that is potentially an option for us, as the French anyway. So, long path to take here. The highway is a long one. Now, unfortunately, there's one drawback that I'm going to experience playing this game, guys. Um, and it really is a bit of a shame. Ordinarily, if you're playing this opposed, and like many of the OSG Napoleonic games, Fog of War just adds something to the gameplay that is hard to replicate um, when you don't have Fog of War. So in Library of Napoleonic Battles, whether that's using masking counters or counter sleds, that need to use vedettes to scout and identify the enemy, and you're not sure who's and what hex doing what, that's a really important element here. That exists in this game too. And in fact, every unit that you would expect to be on the map itself, their flag, you don't need masking counters, they're just flipped over. So here we have, who was it? Ah, it was Napoleon. And who is this? I believe this is the Cossack general, Platov. So when such time you would ordinarily be right next to each other or having a revealed situation, you simply flip the units over and you can see who it is, and then you have a rough idea of what forces are with that leader. Now, unfortunately, I can only split my mind and compartmentalize so much. So I will not be using the reverse sides like this. I'm just not going to do that. Now, if you were to play an opposed game, or if you look at pictures online of the game being played, you may notice those flags, meaning they are playing with Fog of War. That's sort of the default expectation, and that provides a lot more sort of unexpected situations can arise. Keep in mind, because this is a solitaire game, and I can only outthink myself so much, I can't really surprise myself. My game experience is going to differ from yours if you're going to play an opposed game with the Fog of War and the flipping over of the units to their hidden side. You just can't replicate that same, I don't know if I should move here, who is that really, I need to send my scouts to check out the situation. I'm just going to have a different game experience. So that's not to say that my game experience is, throw it out the window, it doesn't matter, but it will differ in some pretty key gameplay elements because of that, where it can be much more exciting to have that hidden unit factor. And there are probably some ways, I think Mark Herman maybe even came up with one, ways to kind of make this, like play solitaire with the masking and like make things uncertain for yourself. I I think I've got enough on my plate just to learn this new system that I'm just going to play, things with clear vision. We'll pretend like the vedettes have helicopters and that they're flying over the lands of Russia, reporting coordinates, and we'll just have to do it that way, guys. It's a bummer, I will aim to play this opposed at some point, but I need to learn the game system first, and this will be a solitaire learning experience for me, and you're along for the ride for as long as you want to be. But we're just not going to be able to replicate a true hidden movement fog of war element here. We're just going to have to play the table that we've got. So that's a warning to you guys more than anything, just to understand, like, hey, the stuff that I'm going to be talking about, the strategies that I may mention, in a real opposed game, I might not even be able to articulate a strategy because I don't know exactly where my enemy is, and my plans would be more vague and less certain because I'm going to have to account for unexpected surprises. Here, I just can't surprise myself. As much fun as that might be, I just have some limited capability to do that. I may, maybe I'll change my mind and I'll dig up the Mark Herman thing and figure out if I can make it work. But my key thing here is this is a brand new system. It has got some of its own complexities. I'm going to try to tackle this stuff on my own, and we'll see how it goes. But already, I mean, just look at it, how attractive these counters are. They're just very nice looking, and they look great on the map. So this is going to be fun either way. Now, to continue sort of the early exploration of this system, it is going to be really important to look at this line of communication stuff. So, you saw the rough locations of the 2B depots that would get us out to Moscow, but to really understand the way that the supply is supposed to work, they do include this handy dandy diagram chart that describes it for us, um, showing kind of the way that things operate. And if I could zoom in on this piece, but understanding that the dark, I guess black, icon, force cannot be issued movement commands, and the lighter color, which I imagine maybe when this was first made, it was like a color, a brighter color, and it turned into gray. Force may be issued movement commands, and this is the difference between issuing a movement command where a unit is or a leader is guaranteed to be able to move, vice trying to roll for them, right? Maybe not too dissimilar from Library of Napoleonic Battles. And you'll see, so here in this smaller picture, non-active supply source, the friendly map edge, you can trace out 18 hexes to a depot, and then 7 movement points out dispatch distance to a force that cannot be issued movement command. So that force could be able to operate, but they're too far outside the main command structure to be issued movement commands. But they may still have a line of communication. They may still have access to some supplies. That's the piece here. Non-active supply source. And so you basically have to designate like which is your active supply source, and you can change it in the game, but it's going to be your main sort of artery of your supply. And here up here is the active. So keep in mind the lighter gray is more active, more in supply and in command than the darker color for this chart, just the way the color of the charts go. So you could have the active supply source and trace out, in this example, 7 movement points dispatch distance to a force, but again, no movement commands. You could trace out 18 hexes, standard line of communication, out to a depot, and then from there you could trace off the depot 7 movement points dispatch distance for a force. You could then, showing here, an attenuated line of communication out 9 hexes to another depot, and so on. In this segment, you could have another depot and another depot and another depot every nine hexes, or so many movement points. Attenuated line of communication, eventually to your center of operations. And again, think of the center of operations almost like a major HQ, but it's really the hub of your command structure and the end line of your supply tracing, your line of communication. And from there, you could have 7 movement points dispatch distance to a force that can receive movement commands. So long as you're close to the center of operations, right? That's the key mechanic we're going to pay attention to here. You're going to have easier capability to get that force to go off and do something and follow orders. Now you could also have, it looks like, an attenuated line of communication and the supply beyond your center of operations. So this could be a branch that is maybe not your primary branch of advance, but maybe you've needed to branch out and hold a position. Well, you could trace out another 9 hexes to a depot, but if you draw a dispatch distance of 7 movement points from that depot, rather than the center of operations, that will be a force that cannot be issued movement commands. So you see, this picture is actually a pretty good chart of just, you can map this out in your mind of how things operate. And if you're used to a game system like OCS, this is probably not too dissimilar from things like HQ and the supply extender mechanics in that system, where there is a clear path deep into enemy territory, and what you can do off of that main tree of supply is going to be dependent on where your units are at and whether or not they're looking at depots or the actual center of your operations, which you can, I believe, move, and it's going to move forward as you move forward. Now, if we check out the rest of this chart, I just think it's very useful to say dispatch distance is the maximum distance between the center of operations or a depot in a given force, traced from the center of operations or depot to the force leader. Right, and dispatch 7 movement points. And notice, like in some cases, we're tracing hexes, and in some cases, we're tracing movement points. I may need to double check the errata there, but that is something we'll need to watch out for. A valid dispatch distance allows the following. If traced from the active center of operations, the force may receive a movement command, right? That's the lighter color box, right? We can use a movement command, and may benefit from the Army's accumulated AP total when determining attrition. So we haven't talked about attrition yet, but it will become very important for us We just know that we're going to do better dealing with attrition if we're near our center of operations, where all the oomph of our supply wagons and supply logistics are being handled. Um, then number two here, if from a depot or the supply source, uh, we only get the benefit of the Army's accumulated AP total. We don't get the movement command. That's in alignment with what we learned looking at this chart. If traced from a depot, the depot must have a line of communication. The line of communication may be traced from any friendly supply source. So again, you need to make sure that if your line of depots, just go up to our blue progress line here, something gets cut off, you're going to have a problem downstream, right? That's not hard to understand, but will be critical for us over the life of the game. Available supply sources: French army, you can use the western edge. The Russian army uses any other edge, and any primary road which exits the map is a supply source. And then there's that distinction between a non-active and active. There's a counter for that. We will determine it. Now the depots, they cost 1 strength point to build. So you're gonna use up some of your strength, which you're not going to always have a lot of, by the way, to build a depot. And then it is only functional if there is a garrison present, and it can trace its line of communication. So as we progress into Russia, we're going to be building depots. We're going to be leaving a garrison behind to hold it, thus depleting strength from our main sort of spearhead into enemy territory. So I'll keep that in mind. Yes, we can extend a line of communication through a chain of functional depots, and as an exception, a friendly supply source, meaning that west map edge, does not require a garrison to act as a depot. So we get a freebie there, but it's not really not that much of a freebie. And we would hope we'd never have, I guess, Russians stomping on our supply source. That would be very, very bad. But you can start to see just the basic logistics operating rhythm of the game is going to be very much tied to our depot chain, where are units. If we spend too much time and effort, just to think about this for a second, if we were to create a bunch of extra branches of depots, not getting us to the Kremlin, we might have a really safe supply tracing in a very broad area, but it's going to cost us more resources to do that, and we will be less likely to make progress deeper into Russia towards Moscow. So that thin line of supply, extended supply lines, is going to be sort of a logistical reality we'll have to balance as we make our progress into Russia, and the Grand Armée tries to succeed in its maybe unrealistic goal. Now, I do want to take a look at the charts because I think they're going to be indicative of what we're going to need to watch out for as we play the game. So just taking a quick look at this, here's the player charts booklet. There is errata that I have not applied or marked on here, but generally we should be able to follow this without too much in the way of problems. So here's the March attrition table, and this is probably going to be the most aggravating, not necessarily in a bad way, part of this game, is that sure enough, true to history and true to what happened, attrition is going to kill a lot of folks more than even the battles may, and this is how we're going to be doing that. We're going to be rolling dice. We're going to be looking at, if you see, there's a function of march distance here. There's also a number of other modifiers that will add to the roll and thus create the results here. And I mean, if you look at, attenuation, so the more we are tracing out in our supply line, the more attrition we're going to deal with. If we have to forage, weather is going to matter. Our leadership bonus may be able to offset some of it, but we're going to be dealing with a lot of losses here. So we see you refer to the number of APs accumulated for the Army, locate the specified AP column, and for battle scenarios, we're going to have a clear, setup for that.
when the center of operations is active, do not use the current AP level. Find the size of the force. Go to the top of the table, find the march distance on the march distance table. So you can imagine if you march a lot, you're going to be worse off. Roll one die and find the die result on the line corresponding to the march distance. Cross reference. I can't talk today, guys, which is not good for making videos. The die with the size of the force and read the attrition loss in increments on that line. Oh boy. Okay. So what does that really mean? Well, for us on the map, it means the deeper in Russia we go, and the weather, and how far we move in a given action, the more attrition we're going to take. So it could mean that if you really feel like, man, I really need to surge forward and maybe catch the Russian army, I'm gonna march further. I better be ready to accept some additional attrition losses the whole way down. When you think about the number of men that went into Russia and the number of men that left Russia historically, from the French perspective, we're going to be hurting a lot for this. So we're going to have to keep that in mind throughout. Now, there's also some really basic stuff: artillery, fire table. Okay, that's maybe straightforward. We'll get into that. With combat, here's the morale chart. So you can see again, if the French capture a city, we're going to get some change in morale, but we need to see the fire intensity table, which we'll take a look at here shortly. If the Russians capture a city, we're going to negate that morale change. And if Napoleon himself is eliminated, okay, that's very bad. And then if we lose or win critical battles, that will affect the game as well. If we take a look at the next set of charts, again, here's that combat results table. We've already seen that. Here's the administration pool chart. So we'll get into that when we're playing and looking at activations. We're not going to worry too much about it right now, but from the big picture perspective, here's what matters: the fire intensity table. When you capture Riga, Smolensk, or Moscow, right? It's only those three. Roll a die. If you roll a 1, then you get +2 morale for the French. That's great. But if you roll anything else, you're going to get lower and lower, and so much so actually that you might not get much in the way of morale at all. And in fact, based on my reading of the rules, when you capture a city, one of these cities, you're gonna by default get 1, but that might become 0 if you roll a 4 through 6, which will be half the time. So you're expecting to get a lot of morale from capturing these major cities. Don't be so. Don't think it's so. And then we have the negotiation table. So this is the actual, if you capture Moscow, you're going to roll on this table to see if you can get a negotiation started. That could lead to a French victory. You see, at RA is roll again. Any other result, the dots, is basically the Russians refuse to negotiate. Now, there is one thing, and I really wish I knew the right answer here, guys. If you look at the table, if you look at it, all the tables, right? It's very clear. Like, okay, this is a 1d6 die roll, isn't it? Results 1 through 6. This table and its results appear to be a 2d6 die roll because your results are 2 through 12, right? And then your average is going to be a 7. Here's what I'm having trouble with. The rule book says roll a die, but the chart is seemingly a 2d6 spread. So I interpret that like the rule book might be off by a word. It's hard to fuck up a whole table. Sorry, using strong language today, guys. It's hard to screw up a whole table, right? If this was a 1 through 6 table, it would be evident. But this seems like a 2d6 table. So while the rule book doesn't say it, I believe this to be a 2d6 table. Okay? And I'm going to probably play it that way unless I get information otherwise by the time I get to when it matters. There's the weather table, and you can see where the heat will be and when it will be frost and snow, which will be very, very bad. You can see the rest of these things lining up. There's the pursuit table. So this is going to get into the combat system. There's actually a lot of complexity here. There's a whole special player aid for processing a combat. So when there is a battle, it's a very big deal. Um, Usually, because the both sides will be saying, "I'm going to fight a mobile sort of battle. We're not going to have a pitched battle." You're going to use the pursuit table to determine loser losses and whether or not you can actually pursue them to do those losses. And there's a whole complex process to execute this, but just watch that. It'll become important over time, as will this initiative comparison matrix that determines how well that leader is at pursuing an enemy force to do those losses. We also have rules around doing bridging over rivers. And then finally, we have our terrain effects chart that will help us along the way. And well, we'll work all of that stuff out. You can see for clear terrain, the different costs. Nothing overly surprising. And then we have the roads, which are going to give us some discounts on movement. That'll be really important over the life of the game. So that is some interesting bits here, guys. This is again a preview of like what's going to matter when we get things rolling on the table. Now, fortunately for me, I'm going to return to the topic of the negotiation table. When I record these videos, guys, as you may know, they are not all recorded at once. Sometimes my little clips here are spread across a significant amount of time. Here, not too much, but it gave me just enough time to reach out and email to Kevin Zucker and ask about the negotiation table. And indeed, this table is intended to be a 2d6, 2 dice rolled and adding them together result table, not a single die. So it's sort of unidentified errata, either because no one, bothered to look at the detail and actually get hung up over the details and probably just rolled 2d6 all the time, or I'm the first person to care enough to ask. I don't know. But it is 2d6, not a single die. Keep that in mind when you're playing at home and you have captured Moscow. Negotiation table, 2d6. Which actually makes it, because it's important to look at this, if, let's say, you're in the upper stratosphere of Paris morale, let's say 3 and above, which that might actually be hard to get, the average die roll, or the die roll that you should expect to get most often because of the combination of dice sums, would be a 7, which would get you the negotiation result, which could lead to a victory. But I don't think the French morale was ever that high, and the negotiations didn't really work out for them. So keep that in mind. One nice correction. And then before we wrap up the video, because I think we've done a lot of the needed introduction to kind of talk through what the game is and what its components are and what do we care about. Before we wrap up, I do want to look at the sequence of play to kind of help us organize around like what's going to be happening. I think after this video, I'm going to focus on setting up a battle scenario just so I can get to playing something and get a feel for it, and do that on camera with you guys. And we'll eventually try a campaign game, I think. But here's the sequence of play. Now, what I did here is I went to the PDF of the standard rules rule book. I copied and pasted the contents of the sequence of play section into Word. I reformatted some things, font size and spacing, so that it could all fit on one sheet of paper, front and back printed. And that worked out pretty well. I'm going to probably keep this on the table in my, see-through plaque holder thing. I don't know, whatever. I got this at Staples once upon a time. But if we want to follow through here, this will give us a sense of the way the game is going to run. First of all, each turn is going to have weather determination. We've already seen the table for that, right? It could be very, very hot. It could be very, very cold with frost. And then we get the first player turn, which would be succeeded by a second player turn, which will involve all the same steps. And then here we have, the beginning is the command phase, and the administrative segment, most or really all of it, is really only important for the campaign game, which we will not be doing right away, but we receive administrative points that go to our track. We designate supply sources. We can disband our center of operations if we want. or we're going to, or and I should say, we will be adding replacement strength points to our replacement pool. This is followed up by the organization segment where we're going to transfer strength points from the replacement pool to units in the field. Mess around with our major generals, which are sort of like, lower level generals, not the named leaders, so that units can still move around if you want to break off a set of units. You could transfer combat units between leaders that are together, and strength points and all that good stuff. So organization, moving stuff around, which would then be followed by the movement phase, where first you deal with reinforcements. So if there's some new units entering the map, then you're going to work on activating those guys first with a free movement command. So you move the forces, you check for attrition. The movement commands, then you can move those that are eligible, indicating that they received the movement command, so on and so forth. In battle scenarios, we get a certain number per turn. So that is really how you're going to expect to move most of your forces that are in your main set of operations or near your center of operations, where you can use these movement commands to go do what you want them to do. Then there'll be the initiative movement, which will be for everybody else, that you're going to have to roll dice to see if they actually do something, not too dissimilar from Library of Napoleonic battles. And then finally here, there's going to be the potential for some attrition for units that didn't move. And then, and there's consolidating that have multiple leaders, where this is more stack management than anything. So again, more of an organizational step. And if we're going to be building any bridges or pontoons, we'll worry about that right there at the end of movement. So all that's movement. And then the vast majority of this sequence of play sheet that I made does comprise of the combat phase. And this is going to be a bit of a complex thing. I'll try to run through this very quick. There is a forced march opportunity for the second player to move forces in response through the initiative march procedure. I mean, you got to roll dice and hope that your initiative allows you to move. And then they're going to suffer some additional attrition. This would be important if, like, the enemy's making a move that really you need to respond to, or you need to get out of their way, or something like that. But you're going to be paying extra attrition for it. So you could almost think of this like reaction movement in maybe another wargame system. This is forced march for your opponent. This would be before combat really takes place in the battle resolution step. So here then, the first player is now obligated to attack all forces that are in the zone of control of their forces. And then you go through. You're going to designate the attacking force, the defenders. Both players are going to decide pitched or pursuit. There is actually a third option for a buy for the non-active player. Basically, this is just going to determine if the loser of the battle, depending on whether the loser had picked pitched or pursuit, will affect how the combat is actually like conducted in terms of losses and how losses can be taken. This, I think, is probably going to be one of the trickiest parts of this system to understand, because if we look out at the extent of Russia, I'm going to guess most of the time the Russians, who may be on the losing side, will choose pursuit as their option, because they're going to want to retreat. That's the battle. What do they call it here? The battle marker selection. If you pick pursuit and you're the loser, then you're going to be trying to run away from combat, and that will lead to probably less losses in total. I would think it's hard to say. If you pick pitched battle, then what can happen is you're going to fall into this weird momentum of like attack and counterattack that could go multiple rounds and could decimate your army and do a lot of casualties. So it's hard to say, like, when would you ever pick pitched battle? I think in circumstances where maybe, a battle of attrition is on your side and you just need to fix the enemy. If you go in a battle, you pick pitched, and in that off chance that you're the battle loser, you're creating this pitched battle circumstance, as opposed to if both sides pick pursuit, and I suspect that a lot of the time both sides would, It's really more about the maneuver. So that's going to be something I'm going to be trying to unlock. The secret of here is understanding how to work the battle marker selection in a way that will make sense. We determined cavalry differential. There's going to be artillery fire, both sides having an opportunity to use artillery firing. Then we determine our combat odds, and we're going to end up rolling some dice, and we're going to figure out who is the winner or the loser. The victor loses strength points equal to the result on the CRT, and then it matters on the losing side. If they picked pursuit, then they're going to retreat a certain number of hexes, and then they'll be pursued, which may actually cause the actual strength point losses here. Here you see if there is a retreat, the victor may now pursue, causing 1 SP loss for each hex of pursuit. So you're going to retreat a certain number of hexes in that pursuit case as the loser if you picked, again, pursuit battle marker. Like if the result is 0-4, you're going to retreat 4 hexes, and then you could lose up to 4 strength points if the winner can actually pursue you properly. Then you're going to adjust morale if it was a critical battle. If the losing side chose pitched, then you're going to go through all this cycle of basically doing a counter attack, and things get really messy from there, I think. And we'll see what that works out to be over time. And then finally, at the tail end there's a joint consolidation. That's just to clean up anything where units are kind of co-stacked. We adjust morale for whatever may be going on. And then there's a second player turn where we do it all over again from the other player's perspective. And that's a game turn. And when it's over, we start all over again with a weather determination, it seems like. So all things told, the actual process of executing the sequence of play doesn't seem terribly complicated. It makes a lot of sense, but each, at every stage, there could be a lot of decisions that we're going to have to make. There's going to be some die rolling, things like attrition we're going to have to check for. When we do get to combat, that combat is so complex that there is actually a bespoke battle tracker. So this is a sheet that comes with the game. You probably want to photocopy this. I already have. It's split into 4, so 4 different battles. And if you want to look here, you could name your battle. That's cool. You give it a date, on what date did the battle happen, the attacking commander, defending commander, and then you're kind of charting it out, like how many strength points of each side. Okay, cavalry differential. And then you're going to do your artillery firing. You're going to keep track of everything. And if there's a counterattack because of a pitched battle, then you're going to continue to roll it out. It's kind of interesting, that the battle is complex enough that it's worthwhile to jot this down. You probably don't need to do that, but it is interesting that, okay, we're going to have a battle, and we're going to name the battles. The Battle of, whatever, Mogilev. You could write that up this way. I think that's interesting. We'll see if I actually bother to use it. I'm not sure that I will, but we'll see. So there you go, guys. Now, what am I going to do next? Well, we're going to call this video to a close. In the next video, I'm going to get us set up for, I think, the Borodino battle scenario, just because that should get us right into the action. The French morale is the highest that it is in any of the setups, so that we can at least see just how far has the French army come, and can we see what a late stage game situation really looks like, the historical situation as rendered in the game terms. And we'll play that, and then we'll see where things go from there. Now, as a preview, just to show you the game exclusive rules, Borodino is here. So we start on August 24th, and it runs until the 19th of September, inclusive. First player is Russian, and then there's some additional definition bits about, what track values are where, what supply sources are where, this, that, and the other. You can see Paris morale is only a +1. Everywhere else, it's 0 or less than 1. So those, the cities being on fire is probably not helping anything, but that's what we're going to set up for. In terms of actual number of turns, again, if we were starting on August 24th, August 24th is turn 13. This is the turn record track. It's turn 13 here. And if we're going to play to what, 19th of September, that's turn 18. So turns 13 through 18. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6 turns. That's not so bad. That's doable. I think we could do 6 turns and figure things out to such a degree that we'll be ready for a full campaign after that if things go reasonably well. So yeah, guys, we will check out the Borodino scenario in the next video. There'll be setup and probably some kind of talk through of the situation and strategy, and we'll get to playing it, which I may cover in a handful of videos. I'm not sure at what pace I'm going to cover this in. There might not be that much to show that I could go into pretty deep detail. We'll see. But anyway, that's it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Our first real hard look at Highway to the Kremlin 2. I think it's going to be a good one. I'm excited. This fun palate cleanser before I do more World War III type stuff. So we'll see you in the next video. Hope this was interesting. Stay tuned for more. Take care. Keep on gaming.